Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into the world of conversational hypnosis.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, and I think we all have some preconceived notions about what hypnosis is,
Yeah,
right?
boy.
So I'm really excited to get into it with you today. We're looking at the work of Virginie Eymere,
Okay.
who is a trainer in advanced conversational hypnosis.
Yeah.
And she really digs into how we can achieve lasting change through this. And I think she has a really interesting take on it that maybe goes against what some people might think.
I'm excited to hear it.
So let's just jump right in. One of the things that she talks about is this idea of, a lot of therapists, and this is something that you've observed as well,
Yeah.
is that they learn these techniques and they try to apply them almost like a recipe.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's so prevalent in the field. And, in my opinion, it's one of the biggest issues with therapy in general
Yeah.
is that we're trying to force people to fit into these predetermined boxes. And, she uses this great analogy.
I love analogies.
Yeah, right. It makes it so much more understandable.
Yeah.
But she's saying that, it's like if you think you can become a millionaire just by saying affirmations,
Right.
you might have this temporary boost.
Yeah.
You might feel good for a little bit, but it's not actually going to lead to lasting change.
Right. You're not actually addressing the systems that are in place
Exactly.
that are preventing you from becoming a millionaire.
Exactly.
Or whatever that goal is.
It's the same with our problems,
Right.
our emotional problems.
And our emotional problems tend to be much more complex
Absolutely.
than just, I need to fix this one thing.
Yeah.
It's usually much deeper than that.
Right. And if we don't address those deeper issues,
Yeah.
we're just putting a Band-Aid on it.
Totally.
We're not actually getting to the root of the problem.
So what does she offer as an alternative?
Well, she talks about this idea of organic transes.
Organic transes.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. Tell me more.
So instead of, having this predetermined script or structure.
Right, like a recipe.
Exactly.
Yep.
The therapist allows the client's unconscious mind to kind of guide the process.
Okay.
So it's more about working with the client's inner wisdom.
So it's a little bit more like a dance than a dictatorship.
Yes, exactly. And what's so fascinating is that by respecting the intelligence of the unconscious mind,
Right.
she's found that healing often happens more effectively and spontaneously.
It sounds counterintuitive.
It is?
Right, because you think, the harder I push for something,
Yeah,
the faster it will happen.
you would think so, right?
But actually, she's saying the opposite.
Exactly. And this is what's so beautiful about her approach is that it really challenges our conventional thinking
Yeah.
about how therapy should work.
Right. And, when I think about this, it reminds me of this analogy of, our conscious mind being like the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
And then this vast unconscious being everything that's underneath the surface.
Exactly. And her work really suggests that we need to dive deeper.
We need to go under the water
Yes.
into that richness and complexity.
And I think that's where the real transformation happens.
So how does a therapist actually facilitate that diving deeper? Is it just like sitting in silence?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
She suggests that therapists need to shut up more.
Shut up more.
Yeah.
That seems counterintuitive.
It is.
Well.
It is. And, it's not what we typically picture when we think of a therapist, right?
No, we don't think of a therapist as being quiet.
Right.
We think of them as asking questions and
Exactly.
giving advice.
Yeah. But actually what she's saying is that by creating this space
Yeah.
for the client's inner wisdom to kind of emerge,
Right.
that's where the real magic happens.
That does sound pretty magical.
Yeah. And it requires a lot of trust.
I imagine on both sides.
Absolutely. Both from the therapist and the client.
Right.
Because it's a skill that takes time and practice to develop.
Yeah.
And, it's not about simply being quiet.
Right.
It's about learning to observe, to listen deeply, and to really trust that process.
So if it's not about following a script,
Right.
what does an organic trance session actually look like?
Well, that's what's so fascinating is that each session is completely unique.
Okay.
So it's not about following a predetermined path. It's about creating a space for the client's unconscious to reveal what needs to be addressed.
So there's no one size fits all.
Exactly. And she shares some really compelling examples of this in her work.
Okay.
In some cases, clients spontaneously healed inner child issues.
Wow.
Or even overcame smoking addictions.
Through this process.
Yeah, through their own unique process of imagination and exploration.
No, they weren't following a script. They were just kind of
No.
exploring.
Exploring and being guided by their own unconscious mind.
So I'm starting to understand why she calls this organic, because it's almost like
Yeah,
each session is growing and unfolding in its own way.
exactly.
Kind of like a play.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And I think it emphasizes the importance of honoring each client's individual journey.
Yeah, this is so insightful already.
Yeah.
I'm really eager to hear more about how this organic approach plays out in practice
Yeah.
and, how we can apply these ideas to our own lives.
Me too. Let's dive into that next.
Awesome.
One thing that Eymere really emphasizes is that when we rely too heavily on those forced techniques, it can actually create a lot of unnecessary pressure
Oh, yeah, for sure.
on both the therapist and the client.
How so?
Well, think about it. If a therapist goes into a session with this really rigid set of techniques
Mm,
and they're expecting to get a certain outcome and they don't,
yeah.
it can create this sense of like failure almost.
Right. And then the client feels like they're broken.
Exactly. Or that they're resistant or that there's something wrong with them.
Right. And the therapist is like, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And so there's this kind of like this negative spiral that can happen.
Yeah, I see that.
But with the organic approach, there's no such thing as a right or wrong outcome.
Okay.
It's about trusting the process and following the client's lead wherever that may lead.
It sounds a lot more freeing.
It is.
But isn't there a risk that things could get a little too unstructured or go off track?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's where the therapist's skill as an observer really comes in.
Okay.
So instead of jumping in with a predetermined technique, they're paying really close attention to the client's language,
Yeah.
their behavior, even their subtle physical reactions.
Interesting. So they're really picking up on all those little cues.
Exactly. There's little cues that the unconscious mind is sending out.
Okay.
And then instead of dictating what should happen next, they use those observations to kind of gently guide the client toward their own unique path of healing.
This reminds me of something she said about how the unconscious mind often knows what needs to happen even before the client consciously understands it.
Yes, exactly. That's
Yeah.
a key principle of the organic approach. And, by trying to force a technique on a client, you might actually be interrupting that natural healing process.
It's like we're so used to trying to control everything
Right.
that we forget to trust the inherent wisdom within us.
And she uses this great analogy to illustrate this point. She compares it to like trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fit and it can cause damage in the process.
It's fascinating to think about how much we value control in our culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we're constantly bombarded with these messages about productivity efficiency, getting things done quickly.
Mhm.
But maybe sometimes the most effective approach is actually to surrender and allow things to unfold naturally.
Yeah. And I think that's a really powerful insight.
Yeah.
And it applies not just to therapy, but to so many aspects of our lives.
Absolutely. So how does a therapist cultivate this skill of observation and non-intervention?
Right. It sounds like a real shift in mindset.
It does.
It certainly does, and it's not something that happens overnight. It takes practice, patience, and a willingness to trust the process.
But the rewards seem worth it
They do.
because she talks about how sessions often become much shorter and more effective
Absolutely.
when therapists embrace this organic approach.
Yes, because the client's unconscious mind is actively participating in the process,
Right.
not just passively receiving instructions.
So it's like a collaboration.
Exactly. And that allows for deeper and more lasting change.
It's almost like the unconscious mind is saying, finally, someone's listening.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And that's when the real magic can happen.
Yeah.
She's witnessed some really remarkable things in her practice clients who spontaneously healed from long-standing issues simply by being given the space to explore their own inner world.
That's incredible to think about the untapped potential within each of us.
It is.
So what does this all mean for someone who's not a therapist? How can we apply these insights from organic hypnosis to our everyday lives?
That's a great question, and it leads us to one of the most important takeaways from Eymere's work. I think one of the biggest things is learning to listen to our own inner wisdom.
It's funny, we talk about listening to our bodies when we talk about health and things.
Right.
We don't really talk about listening to our unconscious minds when it comes to like emotional well-being.
That's so true. And I think it really highlights how we often try to force solutions onto problems
Right.
instead of pausing to really understand what's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's like give a man a fish he eats for a day.
Mhm.
Teach a man to fish he eats for a lifetime.
Right.
Teach a person to listen to their unconscious, they can navigate any challenge.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what Eymere's work is all about. It's this reminder that we all have this incredible inner guidance system,
Right.
but we need to create the space for it to kind of emerge.
And that means like shifting from doing to being right,
Yes. And
from
so,
force to surrender.
yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to get this, but can you give me a specific example of how someone might apply this in their daily life?
Sure. So let's say you're facing a difficult decision at work.
Okay.
Instead of immediately jumping into problem-solving mode or trying to force a solution, just take a few moments to be still and listen to what your intuition is telling you.
So kind of like a mini meditation.
Exactly. Just a few minutes of quiet reflection can make a world of difference.
Yeah,
You might ask yourself, what feels right in my gut?
right.
What am I drawn to? What am I resisting?
And see what comes up.
And by tuning into those subtle cues,
Yeah,
you're really tapping into the wisdom of your unconscious mind.
which knows more than our conscious mind a lot of the time.
Often, yes, especially when our conscious mind is clouded by fear or doubt or overthinking.
I think about all the times I've like agonized over a decision and the answer was there. I just wasn't listening.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of this approach, is that it's not about learning a new technique or following a rigid set of rules. It's about cultivating a deeper connection with ourselves,
Yeah.
with that inner wisdom that's always available to us.
I love that. This has been such a great deep dive.
It has.
Really challenged my thinking about how change happens, not just in therapy, but in life.
Absolutely.
And it's so inspiring to think that we all have this potential for healing and transformation within us.
We do.
And it all starts with listening.
It does.
So to our listeners out there, I encourage you to take a moment today to just be still and listen. What is your intuition trying to tell you?
Great advice.
What possibilities are waiting to be explored?
I love it.
Until next time, keep diving deep.